Our first case was in Anchorage, the summer of 2016. Now, if you've never been to Alaska in the summer, it's hard to wrap your head around. The sun barely sets. You get 19, sometimes 20 hours of daylight, so even at midnight, it feels more like a late afternoon. People are usually out biking, fishing, living their lives under these weird, day-like nights. That's the kind of night it was on July 3rd, 2016, when Brianna Foisey, just 20 years old, and Jason Netter Sr., 41, decided to take a late-night bike ride along Ship Creek Trail. Ship Creek is one of those places that feels like the heart of Anchorage. Everyone loved it there. It's safe, welcoming, the kind of spot you'd never think something dangerous could happen at. Brianna and Jason were pedaling along, probably laughing, enjoying the cool air and the strange brightness of a midnight sun. Then, out of nowhere, a figure stepped from the trees. 2 shots cracked through the quiet. It was precise, cold, and final. Brianna and Jason collapsed, dead before they could even process what happened. Nothing was stolen from them. No signs of a motive. Just 2 lives snuffed out in an instant. Anchorage police were floored. Random shootings weren't a thing here. Anchorage isn't Chicago or New York. It's a tight-knit city where violent crime feels more personal. Detectives scoured the scene, looking for anything. A shell casing, a witness, or even a reason. Was it a drug deal gone bad? A personal grudge? The police interviewed friends, family, and co-workers, but nothing added up. Brianna was a college student with a bright future. Jason was a father, well-liked, with no known enemies. The case sat heavy, unsolved, with no leads. Then, 26 days later, on July 29th, it happened again. Travion Kendall Thompson, who was 21, was simply walking home from his job at a local restaurant. It was early morning, still light out, on Post Road, a quiet street. Someone then approached him, maybe said a few words, and then a single shot. Travion fell, dead, same caliber bullet and same execution-style precision. Again, no sign of a robbery or a struggle, just another dead body left out in the open. The Anchorage Daily News reported the police starting to whisper about a pattern, but they kept it quiet to avoid panic among the locals. 2 shootings, same gun, and yet no plausible motive. It wasn't random anymore. Someone was out there, stalking and terrorizing the city. By August 28th, the terror worsened. Valley of the Moon Park, another Anchorage favorite where families went out to have picnics and allow their kids to play soccer. Kevin Turner, 34, and Bryant DeHusen, 25, were hanging out as the sun finally dipped low. They were just chilling, maybe talking about their day, when the killer struck again. 2 shots, 2 bodies, same gun, and the same chilling lack of reason. The police, now desperate, dubbed him the Anchorage Night Stalker, but the name didn't stick. Anchorage was too stunned, too scared, to give this ghost a nickname. For months, the city held its breath. Police increased patrols, urged people to avoid trails at night, even though night barely existed. Community meetings, documented in a 2016 Alaska Public Media report, showed residents demanding answers. Was it a serial killer? A gang? The police had ballistics linking the murders, a .357 Colt Python revolver, but no suspect, no motive, no way to predict where he'd strike next. Then, on November 12, 2016, it all came to a head. Officer Arn Salau was on patrol in downtown Anchorage when he noticed a man walking alone. There was something about him, maybe his posture, maybe the way he moved, that set off alarm bells. Salau approached, calm but cautious. The man was James Dale Ritchie, 40, a nobody in every sense. Average build, average face, the kind of guy you'd probably forget 5 minutes after meeting. But when Salau got close, Ritchie didn't talk. He pulled that .357 Colt Python and fired. Salau took a hit but fired back, dropping Ritchie on the sidewalk. The officer survived. Ritchie didn't. The gun was taken to the crime lab, and the results were undeniable. A perfect match to all 5 murders. James Dale Ritchie, a man with no known violent past, was Anchorage's ghost killer. But who was he? Ritchie grew up in Anchorage's Wonder Park neighborhood, a kid with promise. At East Anchorage High School, he was a star athlete, standing 6'3", playing on the 1994 state championship football and basketball teams alongside future pros Trajan Langdon and Mau Tosi. College scouts noticed him, and he seemed destined for greatness. Ritchie went to West Virginia University in Morgantown, but dropped out after one semester. That's where his life started to decline. By his late teens, he was deep into dogfighting and drug dealing, racking up arrests, including a 2005 burglary charge where police found him with handcuffs and 2 pistols, according to reports. His mental health crumbled. In personal writings, uncovered by the Anchorage Daily News, Ritchie poured out his regret. "I lay in bed every night, thinking about how I've ruined my life. Then I sit up crying, wishing I could go back to high school." He dreamed of finishing college, raising a family, even owning a home, but as a felon, he wrote, "I'll never get a good job." What turned a high school hero into a killer at the age of 39, well past the typical age for serial killers? Police never really pinned down a motive, but theories were abundant. One points to Ritchie's obsession with his lost potential. His writings scream of a man trapped by his past, comparing his ruined present to his glory days. Travion Kendall Thompson's murder adds a chilling layer. Travion's father, Bobby, was Ritchie's childhood friend. They were as close as brothers. Ritchie slept over at Bobby's house as a teen and was even welcomed like family, according to an Alaska public media interview with Bobby. Did seeing Travion, young and full of promise, spark envy or rage in Ritchie, a reminder of what he'd lost? Another theory digs even deeper. Ritchie spent years in West Virginia, Nevada, and Virginia, but what he did there is a black hole. The FBI investigated, suspecting more victims, much like they did with Alaska serial killer Israel Keyes, whose travels left a trail of unlinked disappearances. According to a 2018 FBI report partially redacted, no hard evidence tying Ritchie to other crimes was found, but they didn't rule it out. His .357 Colt Python only tied him to the 5 Anchorage killings, but there are still some speculations. Did Ritchie kill elsewhere? Were there test runs before 2016? The lack of answers fuels the unease. Ritchie's case is a gut punch because he wasn't a cartoon villain. He was the neighbor who waved, and a guy who blends in. His decline, from star athlete to drug dealer, felon, and alcoholic, shows how close success and destruction can be. In Anchorage's endless summer light, he found shadows to hide his darkness, killing 5 people for reasons we'll never really understand. If you're enjoying the video so far, and you enjoy this type of story, please like and subscribe for more. Let's step back to the year 1979. This next case takes place somewhere that sounds like it was plucked from a Christmas card: North Pole, Alaska. Just outside Fairbanks, this town is all about holiday cheer. Streets are named Kris Kringle Drive, and even a Santa Claus house where kids mail letters to the North Pole. It's the kind of place you'd think is immune to the darkness of the world, where probably the biggest worry is whether the reindeer decorations are up by December. But in August 1979, something evil walked into North Pole, and it was wearing a uniform that promised safety. Thomas Richard Bunday was a 31-year-old technical sergeant at Eielson Air Force Base, a sprawling military hub near Fairbanks. To his fellow airmen, he was a model soldier, disciplined and professional, the kind of guy you'd trust to have your back. His Air Force uniform was a badge of honor, a symbol that made locals smile, that made parents tell their kids, "If you're ever lost, just find someone in uniform." But Bunday wasn't what he seemed. He was a predator, and that uniform was his perfect disguise. It started with Glinda Sodman, who was 19. She vanished in August 1979, a free spirit, working odd jobs in Fairbanks, and known for her bright smile. 2 months later, hunters found her body in a remote gravel pit off a back road, strangled, her life snuffed out with chilling precision. The location was noted to be deliberate, miles from anywhere, chosen with a purpose to hide the crime. Detectives figured it was a one-off, maybe a personal dispute, but they were wrong. In June 1980, the horror hit even harder. Doris Ehring, just 11 years old, was walking through Fairbanks when a witness saw her talking to a man in an Air Force uniform. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her body turned up in another gravel pit, strangled and discarded like trash. An 11-year-old, in a town built on Christmas magic, was betrayed by the one person she was taught to trust. The Fairbanks Daily News Miner ran a story pleading for leads, but the trail went cold. The killings continued. January 1981. Marlene Peters, 20, was hitchhiking, a common sight in Alaska's small towns where people look out for each other. She got into a car, and her body was later found in, you guessed it, another gravel pit, strangled. Then Wendy Wilson, 16, was last seen getting into a car with someone from Alaskan, and finally, Lori King, 18, found strangled near the base itself in October 1981. 5 victims, all young women or girls, all killed the same way, all linked to the Air Force Base. Fairbanks was small, but these crimes were spread out. The bodies dumped in remote spots only someone local, someone trained would know. Police reports from the time show investigators struggling to connect the dots. The Air Force connection was obvious, but Bunday's clean record and military status, it gave him cover. The community was growing in fear, and women were warned not to hitchhike or walk alone, yet Bunday kept killing, using his uniform to lure victims, offering rides, gaining trust, and then striking. In 1981, the Alaska murders suddenly stopped, not because Bunday changed, but because the Air Force transferred him to Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas. The nightmare followed him. By 1982, Texas police were investigating similar murders, young women strangled and dumped in remote areas. But this time, a new tool, early computerized criminal databases, helped Texas investigators spot the pattern, and the trail pointed back to Alaska. On March 7, 1983, Alaska state troopers flew to Texas to confront Bunday. He didn't deny a thing. According to records, he confessed to all 5 Alaska murders, describing how he'd used his uniform to approach victims, offered them rides, then strangled them in carefully chosen spots. But here's where the story twists. Alaska police couldn't arrest him in Texas without a warrant. They needed time to build a case. 8 days later, on March 15th, Bunday was dead, killed in what was officially ruled as a motorcycle accident. A news report quoted Texas investigators who suspected suicide, a final act of control from a man who'd controlled life and death for years. The Air Force's own records, declassified in the 1990s, show they never investigated Bunday's behavior at Alaskan, missing red flags that could have saved lives. But to understand how Bunday became what he was, we have to go further back. Bunday grew up in a house that was more battlefield than home. His father, a World War II veteran, came back scarred, not just from war, but from deep mental health struggles that turned him violent. According to a 1983 Anchorage Times profile piecing together Bunday's background, his father's aggression filled their home with screams and fists, targeting his wife and children. It was a toxic environment, steeped in a warped sense of masculinity that normalized hurting those closest to you, especially women. Young Thomas learned early that violence was power, a lesson that would help shape his future in the darkest way. When his father died in 1983, teenage Bunday didn't mourn. He didn't even show up to the funeral. Instead, he ran away from home for days, a silent rebellion against a man who'd made his life hell. Yet, on the surface, Bunday built a life that looked like the American dream. He got married, had children, including a daughter with his wife, and rose through the Air Force ranks to become an electronics instructor, training young airmen at Alaskan. To the outside world, he was a hero, a devoted father, and a pillar of the community. But cracks were forming long before his killing spree. By the mid-1970s, Bunday's marriage was struggling. He had an extramarital affair that resulted in another child, a strain that pushed his family to the breaking point. His superiors noted signs of emotional burnout, mistaking his unraveling psyche for job stress. They didn't see the truth. Bunday wasn't burning out. He was building up to something far darker, a storm that had been brewing since his childhood. What makes this case so disturbing is the betrayal. Bunday didn't just kill, he exploited a symbol of trust. In North Pole, a town where Christmas lights twinkle year-round, he turned a uniform meant to protect into a weapon. And the worst part? There might be more victims. Texas police suspected additional murders but couldn't tie them to Bunday before his death. Somewhere, in gravel pits or forgotten fields, there could be more families waiting for answers that may never come. Sometimes, justice takes years, decades even. Sometimes, it takes a mother who refuses to let her daughter become just another forgotten cold case. This is the story of Bonnie Christine Craig, a young woman whose vibrant life was cut short, and the relentless quest to uncover the truth behind her death. It was September 28, 1994, in Anchorage, Alaska. Bonnie Craig, just 18, was a freshman at the University of Alaska Anchorage, brimming with energy and ambition. Friends described her as vivacious, a spark who lit up any room with her infectious smile and determined spirit. Born and raised in Anchorage, Bonnie was a local through and through, grounded in a tight-knit family and focused on her education. She was a diligent student. Bonnie prided herself on her punctuality, a trait that defined her discipline and drive. She had a boyfriend she was deeply committed to, plans for a future in education, and a life that seemed destined to shine. But on that fateful morning, Bonnie left her home around 5 a.m., bundled against the early fall chill, and headed for the bus stop. A neighbor saw her walking down their street at 5:20 a.m., with her backpack slung over her shoulder. Another witness spotted her at the bus stop an hour later, waiting alone. But Bonnie never made it to class. Later that day, her body was found floating in McHugh Creek, a remote area about 10 miles from her bus stop, where the Chugach Mountains meet Turnagain Arm. It's a place Alaskans visit for quiet hikes or reflection, not somewhere a student would wander on a school day, especially without a car. The medical examiner's report revealed a grim truth. Bonnie had drowned, but not before suffering severe head injuries from blunt force trauma. At first, Alaska state troopers leaned toward a tragic accident, theorizing she might have fallen off a cliff while hiking. But Bonnie's mother, Karen Foster, saw through that explanation immediately. When she looked at her daughter's body, she noticed defensive wounds on Bonnie's hands, scratches and bruises that screamed of a struggle, not a slip. The creek was far from Bonnie's route, and her school belongings, her backpack, books, and notes were missing, never recovered. Karen knew Bonnie wouldn't have detoured to a remote hiking spot on a school morning. Something was wrong. Karen's suspicions deepened when she learned, 6 months later, that a sexual assault examination had found semen on Bonnie's body, a detail police initially withheld, claiming it might have been from consensual sex. But Bonnie's family and friends were adamant. She was in a serious, committed relationship with her boyfriend and would not have been involved with anyone else, especially a stranger. The police's secrecy and reluctance to call it murder frustrated Karen, who felt they were holding back critical information. She teamed up with local reporter Maria Downey, who pushed for transparency and helped amplify Bonnie's case through news coverage. Driven by grief and determination, Karen launched her own investigation. She uncovered a chilling lead. The thing is, Karen had worked undercover with Anchorage police, assisting in drug stings that led to the arrest of several members of a local drug ring. An informant told Karen that Bonnie's murder might have been retaliation, a message to the police to back off. According to Karen, Bonnie was killed the day after the suspects she'd helped identify were released from jail. Despite precautions to protect her identity, it wouldn't have been hard for the drug ring to figure out who had informed on them in Anchorage's small underworld. When Karen shared this with investigators, they pressed her for her source's identity, which she refused to reveal to protect the informant. She felt they dismissed her lead, though police claimed they followed up but shared little, citing an ongoing investigation. A year later, in 1995, one of Bonnie's professors contacted Karen with another disturbing lead. A male student in her class had raised red flags. His journal entries, shared with the professor, referenced September 28, 1994, as a very tough day, when he'd be put to a test, with violent undertones that unsettled her. The student arrived late to class that morning, his clothes wet as if he'd just showered, reeking of cologne as though masking something. After Bonnie's death, his writings turned oddly peaceful, a shift that felt suspicious. Karen dug deeper and learned he had a prior assault charge and had been bailed out by a friend linked to another murder. But DNA evidence and an alibi cleared him, though Karen suspected multiple perpetrators could explain the DNA mismatch, a theory police didn't pursue. By September 1997, Alaska state troopers publicly confirmed Bonnie had been sexually assaulted and beaten before her death, likely thrown over a cliff or falling while fleeing her attacker. They asked for witnesses, piecing together Bonnie's final morning. A neighbor saw a car idling near her home around 5 a.m. An anonymous Crime Stoppers caller reported seeing Bonnie at the bus stop, talking to two men in an older yellow or light tan compact car, which was never found. Despite these leads, the case stalled, with no arrests and no suspects. For 12 years, Karen never stopped fighting. She called detectives relentlessly, pushed for new forensic tests, and became a vocal advocate for cold case families, attending police briefings and lobbying for better investigative tools. Her persistence kept Bonnie's name alive when it could have faded into Alaska's long list of unsolved cases. In November 2006, a breakthrough came. Alaska state troopers retested the semen from Bonnie's body using CODIS, a national DNA database that had grown to millions of profiles since 1994. They got a hit: Kenneth Dion, a 36-year-old career criminal serving time in New Hampshire for armed robberies. Dion was no stranger to violence. At the time of Bonnie's murder, he lived in Anchorage, on probation for robbery and fresh out of an Alaska prison with a history of assault charges. Investigators confirmed he had no connection to Bonnie, her family and friends didn't know him, and he initially denied knowing her. But the DNA was undeniable, a perfect match. In May 2007, Dion was charged with Bonnie's rape and murder. Police believed it was a random act of violence, that he'd spotted Bonnie walking to the bus stop and abducted her. At his trial in May 2011, Dion tried to spin a story. He claimed he'd had consensual sex with Bonnie and she'd accidentally fallen to her death at McHugh Creek while alone. But his story fell apart. He couldn't account for his whereabouts that week. His wife confirmed he hadn't been home. The medical examiner debunked his claim, stating Bonnie's head injuries came from a blunt object or weapon, not a fall. A leaf with her blood, found above the cliff, suggested she was beaten before going over. Dion carried martial arts weapons in his car, which could have inflicted the injuries. Bonnie's family reiterated her loyalty to her boyfriend, making consensual sex with a stranger unthinkable. On June 15, 2011, after a swift deliberation, the jury convicted Dion of first-degree sexual assault and murder. On October 31, 2011, Halloween, Superior Court Judge Jack Smith sentenced him to 124 years in prison, 99 for murder, and 25 for sexual assault, to be served consecutively. At sentencing, Judge Smith says something that still gives me chills. The number and locations of the multiple blows to her head reflect a calculated, methodical beating. The purpose of leaving Bonnie Craig in the creek would appear to be an attempt to either hide or destroy the evidence. In February 2015, Dion's conviction was upheld, sealing his fate. Karen Foster's fight didn't just bring justice for Bonnie. Her advocacy helped push Alaska to expand mandatory DNA collection, helping solve other cold cases. But 17 years is a lifetime to wait, to wonder if a killer is still out there, to carry the weight of a daughter's loss. Bonnie's story is one of tragedy, but also of resilience, a mother who turned unbearable grief into a force for change, ensuring her daughter's killer faced the truth and her legacy lived on. This next case feels ripped from a political thriller, but it's real, rooted in Alaska's rugged heart. It's about Joseph Joe Vogler, a famous Alaska separatist who dreamed of an independent Alaska and vanished just as he was poised to take that vision to the world. Joe Vogler was an Alaskan icon, a grizzled prospector turned fiery advocate whose defiance defined him. Born in 1913 on a Kansas farm, he moved to Alaska in 1942, drawn by the promise of untamed land and freedom. A miner by trade, he waged war against the United States government over access to his gold claims on federal land, reportedly worth millions. His distrust of government ran deep. He shunned U.S. currency and phones, trusting only gold, real estate, and what he called his yellow scrap iron, the Caterpillar tractors he used to bulldoze federal land, mowing down aspens in protest. Vogler once said he'd rather shoot Alaska's last pregnant wolf than the president. Rhetoric so bold it made headlines, even if it was more theatrical than literal. He called his enemies posy-sniffing swine, and the people of Fairbanks, miners, hunters, locals, and old-school Alaskans loved him for it. They nicknamed Anchorage Los Anchorage, seeing it as too tame, too soft. But Vogler? He was the last man standing, a symbol of frontier resistance for them. In 1973, he founded the Alaskan Independence Party and was their longtime chairman. This wasn't some fringe group with 5 members meeting in a cabin. It was a legitimate political party that became a serious force, advocating for Alaska to secede from the United States. Vogler ran for governor in 1974 and 1986, swaying tight races. In 1990, he let Governor Wally Hickel run on the AIP ticket, securing a win. The party had real clout, real numbers, and a very real message. And Joe Vogler was their loudest, boldest, most passionate, and most dangerous voice. On May 30, 1993, Memorial Day, Vogler, then 80, vanished from his Fairbanks home. He was just gone, along with his fedora and .22 caliber pistol. The timing was chilling because Joe was just weeks away from giving a speech at the United Nations in New York. He planned to call out U.S. control over Alaska on the global stage. If he had succeeded, it could have been deeply embarrassing for the United States. Fairbanks erupted in speculation. Was it federal agents silencing him? Political rivals in the AIP? A gold heist, given his valuable claims? Vogler's disappearance didn't fit suicide, especially not for a man who vowed to be buried outside U.S. soil, like his wife Doris, who had been interred in Canada a year before. Friends found his prized dogs and pet geese neglected, something he never would have done voluntarily, ruling out the disappearance as a planned exit. Political allies started pointing fingers, and the FBI denied involvement. For about 16 months, "Where's Joe?" posters dotted Fairbanks fairgrounds, and conspiracy theories thrived at places like Sourdough Sam's Cafe. Then, in May 1994, a break came. Manfred West, 38, a convict recently released from a halfway house for probation violations and bad checks, was cornered by police in his stepbrother's home near Vogler's property. Surrounded, claiming to be armed, West confessed over the phone to shooting Vogler in self-defense during a dispute over plastic explosives Vogler allegedly wanted to buy. But wait, plastic explosives? What the hell was Joe Vogler doing trying to buy plastic explosives? West, in a last act of desperation, set the house on fire, but police pulled him out alive. He later recanted his confession, claiming he was just looking for attention. But at that point, Vogler's body hadn't been found. Then, on October 1994, 17 months after Vogler disappeared, some construction workers found human remains in a gravel pit east of Fairbanks. The body was wrapped in a blue tarp, bound with duct tape, and had a gunshot wound to the chest. This certainly wasn't someone who died of natural causes. It was Joe Vogler. West's original confession, pre-body discovery, matched the tarp and tape, strengthening the case. In 1995, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to 80 years in prison. Case closed, right? Not according to members of the Alaskan Independence Party. The AIP, then led by Chairwoman Lynette Clark, rejected the robbery gone wrong or business deal gone bad narrative. In an interview, Clark called it a political assassination to silence Vogler before his UN speech. Vogler had received documented threats from anti-secessionists, which fueled doubts. The tarp, duct tape, and remote grave suggested it was likely a calculated hit, not a botched deal. Lynn Vogler, Joe's nephew, also doubted the official story. And in Fairbanks, people whispered. Without a body initially, police struggled to convince skeptics that West acted alone, and conspiracy theories persisted. Still, Joe got his last wish. He was buried in Dawson City, Yukon, Canada, not on U.S. soil, a final middle finger to the country he claimed had stolen Alaska. The AIP never recovered its momentum. Without Vogler, the fire faded. But the question remained. Was Joe Vogler really killed in a petty deal gone wrong? Or was it a cold, precise move to eliminate Alaska's loudest rebel? Maybe it was just a coincidence. Or maybe that was exactly the point. Our final case takes us back to 1970, to one of the most remote places in Alaska, the Inupiaq village of Kiana. If you've never heard of Kiana, you're not alone. It's a tiny village in northwest Alaska, about 30 miles from the Arctic Circle. We're talking about a place where the nearest big city is hundreds of miles away, where winter temperatures drop to 50 below zero, where people still live by traditional subsistence, hunting, fishing, and surviving off the land. For the Inupiaq, caribou are a lifeline. Their meat sustains families through months of brutal winter cold. And in this isolated, frozen world, a hunting camp 70 miles up the Kobuk River became the stage for a tragedy that shattered Kiana's heart and exposed deep fractures in Alaska's justice system. Norman Leroy Butch Johnson, a 19-year-old from Anchorage, was an outsider in this tight-knit native community. Born and raised in urban Anchorage, Butch was a city kid with no experience with Arctic survival. He was visiting his father in Kiana, and he saw a chance for adventure when his father arranged for him to join a caribou hunt, which was a rare opportunity for a city kid. The hunt was led by Freddie Jackson, an experienced Inupiaq hunter and friend of Butch's father, who took Butch to a camp where they'd meet two other seasoned Inupiaq hunters, Clarence Arnold and Oscar Henry. Now, hunting parties in Alaska aren't like hunting trips in the lower 48. These are serious survival situations, sub-zero temperatures, complete isolation. So, if something goes wrong, help isn't coming anytime soon. And then, something did go wrong. The journey turned sour early. En route, Butch fell from the sled behind Jackson's snow machine as they pursued a caribou herd. Rather than stop, Jackson pressed on, prioritizing the herd, which was meat for the village, with plans to circle back for Butch. Alone in the freezing wilderness, Butch, a neophyte in this unforgiving terrain, trudged on foot to the camp, driven by fear of being abandoned. When he arrived, he found Jackson, Arnold, and Henry already butchering a female caribou, its unborn calf exposed. The sight sickened Butch, who later told defense psychologist Dr. Barbara Urey that he felt Freddie Jackson seemed callous about the calf's death, leaving him with a visceral sense of unease and nausea. At camp that night, the group prepared dinner, joined briefly by another Inupiaq, Clarence Wood, who stopped by around 6 p.m. Wood noted Butch was withdrawn, lying on his bed, huddled up, responding only when spoken to. Wood saw nothing overtly alarming, and left around 7 p.m. After dinner, as Jackson, Arnold, and Henry readied for bed, the camp's quiet was disrupted. Butch later told troopers, "I got up to go to the bathroom, and I went outside and I got my rifle and I just started firing into the tent. The shots intently tore through the tent walls." Freddie Jackson, Clarence Arnold, and Oscar Henry, aged 30, 29, and 34, died instantly, each killed by precise rifle fire. Butch then claimed a surviving hunter was responsible, but ballistics unmistakably tied the bullets to his rifle. The massacre left Kiana reeling. A sacred hunting camp, a place of community and survival, turned into a slaughterhouse by an outsider they'd welcomed. At trial in 1970, held without a jury in Nome, Butch's defense leaned on his psychological state. Dr. Urey testified that Butch, shaken by the caribou calf's death and feeling mocked or dismissed by the experienced hunters, suffered a psychic lapse triggered by the cold, isolation, and his sense of alienation. He claimed he had no memory of the act, suggesting a dissociative episode. The prosecution countered with the calculated nature of the shootings. Butch stepped outside, retrieved his rifle, and fired targeted shots, clearly showing intent. The judge rejected the lapse defense, convicting Butch of 3 counts of second-degree murder. The sentence stunned the Inupiaq community. Just 4 years in prison, 16 months per life taken. For Kiana, where trust and interdependence are survival, the leniency was a betrayal. The village leaders decried the verdict as proof that Native lives were undervalued in Alaska's justice system. Would a Native hunter who killed 3 white men face such a light sentence? The answer was obvious to them: no. The case barely registered outside Alaska, overshadowed by urban headlines, but in Kiana it remains a raw wound, a story passed down in oral histories and archived by the Alaska Native Heritage Center. Butch's background offers little clarity on his actions. Raised in Anchorage, far from Kiana's cultural and environmental realities, he was a young man out of his depth. His father's connection to Freddie Jackson suggests a degree of trust, yet Butch's inexperience and discomfort in the Arctic, evident in his reaction to the caribou butchering, may have deepened his sense of isolation. Having no prior criminal history or psychological diagnoses was noted in court records, leaving his lapse claim thin. Some speculate the hunter's teasing, common in tight-knit groups, hit a nerve in Butch, but nothing could justify the violence. This case exposes Alaska's divides: native versus non-native, rural survival versus urban detachment, and a justice system that, to many, seemed to value some lives more than others. In Kiana, the grief still lingers, and the question remains: how many lives must be lost before justice stops being conditional? 5 stories from the depths of Alaska, where beauty masks horror and justice often slips through the ice. Jamesdale Ritchie, a ghost in the endless light, killing for reasons he took to the grave. Thomas Bunday, a predator cloaked in a uniform's trust. Bonnie Craig, whose mother battled for 17 years for the truth. Joe Vogler, a rebel silenced before his global moment. And Norman Butch Johnson, whose massacre and light sentence exposed a fractured system. These cases share a thread. Alaska's isolation hides killers, trust can be deadly, and some victims are forgotten when headlines fade. These stories needed to be told, and these victims needed to be remembered. If you enjoyed this video as much as I did making it, please kindly drop a like, hit subscribe, and let's keep unearthing some more stories. Until next time, stay safe out there, especially if you're ever in Alaska. Because you never know who might be watching, waiting, in all that endless darkness.